The cargo ship was seized before the diplomats could sit down. That is where this story begins, not with a formal collapse of talks, not with a new missile strike, not even with Donald Trump's latest boast, with a ship linked to Iran, intercepted and boarded by the United States at the exact moment when the next round of diplomacy was supposed to come into view. That moment matters because it exposes the real structure of this crisis. The real story is not that Trump-Iran talks are simply falling apart in some vague, accidental way. The real story is that Trump keeps turning de-escalation openings into humiliation traps, and Iran keeps showing that it will not walk into a room if the price of entering that room is public humiliation. That is the master axis. If you understand that, the rest of the story starts lining up very quickly. Iran signals some space for de-escalation. Trump rushes to declare victory. The Iranian side sees the signal being weaponized against it. The opening closes. Then the cycle begins again. That pattern sits all through the file. Trita Parsi's point is not subtle. Trump is not merely bargaining hard. He is repeatedly choosing the optics of dominance over the discipline required to actually secure a deal. And in wartime, that is not just sloppy, it is dangerous, because humiliation is not a side issue in negotiations like this. It changes incentives. It changes what the other side can accept without paying a political price at home. It changes the internal balance between those arguing for restraint and those arguing that restraint only invites more pressure. That is why the cargo ship seizure matters so much. It is not only a tactical maritime move, it is the latest piece of a public script in which Trump tries to prove that he is still the one coercing, still the one forcing, still the one who can make Tehran move and then frame that movement as submission. That may work in some negotiations. Parsi's argument is that it does not work here because the Iranians are not only negotiating over sanctions, uranium, or regional arrangements, they are negotiating over dignity and political narrative at the same time. That phrase in the file matters more than it may seem at first. Both sides need a winning narrative. That is one of the deepest truths in the whole conversation. Negotiations do not survive on technical terms alone. They survive because both governments can tell a story about why entering the process did not mean they had already lost before the first concession was even drafted. Trump wants to tell a story in which his threats worked, his coercion broke the other side, and Iran came because it had no choice. Iran wants to tell a story in which it resisted, imposed costs, preserved leverage, and entered talks without kneeling first. Those two narratives can overlap only if both sides are careful. Trump is not being careful. That is the problem. He sees an opening and rushes to stage it as proof of personal dominance. Parsi says this has already happened more than once. Iran makes a de-escalatory move or signals some restraint. Trump jumps out first, humiliates them publicly by claiming total victory, and the opening collapses. That is not normal bargaining friction. It is self-sabotage with strategic consequences. And the consequences are larger now because the war itself has changed the balance of needs on both sides. Iran needs sanctions relief. That is one of the hardest realities in the file. Hormuz gives Tehran leverage. The strait can create pressure, instability that can make the whole world pay attention. But leverage through the strait is not reconstruction. It is not investment. It is not the reopening of a sanctioned economy. It is not the rebuilding of a country damaged and distorted by years of pressure. That means Iran's real long-term interest still points toward a deal, and Trump knows it. That is why, in one sense, he does have real leverage. He has sanctions. He has maritime pressure. He has already gotten one of his core objectives by getting out of active war if no deal emerges and the U.S. does not go back into large-scale bombing. He can still claim he avoided a deeper military entanglement. Iran cannot say anything similar. If no deal emerges, Tehran is still stuck under sanctions and still cut off from the kind of recovery it actually needs. That is the asymmetry. Iran needs a deal more than Trump does, but leverage is not the same thing as discipline, and that distinction may decide everything. A disciplined negotiator would use leverage to secure terms. Trump keeps using leverage to create the image of domination, even when that image makes the other side less able to enter the room. That is the contradiction at the heart of this crisis. And then the file introduces the second force that makes the contradiction even harder to resolve. Israel, this part matters enormously. Parsi argues that Israel can live more easily with the United States stepping back from active bombing than it can with the United States making a real sanctions. Lifting deal, war degrades Iran quickly. Sanctions degrade Iran slowly. Both serve the larger purpose of constraining Iranian recovery and weakening its industrial base over time. A real deal interrupts that logic. A real deal gives Iran breathing room, investment, recovery, reconstruction. That is why sanctions relief is not a technical side issue. It is the dividing line between managing Iran and allowing Iran to recover. Which means Trump's problem is not just whether he can get a deal with Tehran. It is whether he wants to pay the political price of making that deal real. That creates his bad options tree. He can cut a real deal and face a major fight with Israel and its allies. He can walk away from a real deal, keep the pressure architecture alive, stay out of full-scale war, and still claim he handled the crisis, or he can keep doing what the file suggests he has been doing. Exaggerate progress, talk down oil, create the impression that a breakthrough is always close, and prepare a blame narrative for the moment everything falls apart. That third option may be politically easiest for him, and that is what makes it so dangerous, because it turns diplomacy into theater, exaggerate the progress, claim the breakthrough, humiliate the other side. Then, when they recoil, say they destroyed the deal, that is not negotiation. That is image management sitting on top of a live battlefield, which is why the file S probability tree matters so much. Parsi says the most likely outcome is not a full agreement and not a full return to war. It is a walkout into a new non-negotiated status quo. That is the 70% scenario in his estimate. And once you see that, the cargo ship seizure becomes even more important. It is not just part of the current standoff. It is a preview of the kind of coercive environment that may define the next phase if no real deal emerges. A quieter war, maritime pressure sanctions, humiliation politics, Israeli sabotage incentives, constant fragility around Hormuz, a system where every new public insult can trigger a new strategic reversal. That is not peace, it is suspended instability, and that is why the current humiliation matters so much. Parsi's answer to the practical question is stark. Something has to happen to erase the last 48 hours. Either Tehran retaliates in some way and restores some balance, or Trump eases off and removes the public insult. But as long as the humiliation remains active, the Iranians are far less likely to show up. That is the larger judgment. The real reason Trump-Iran talks are falling apart is not simply that the issues are hard. It is that Trump keeps choosing the performance of dominance over the discipline of statecraft. And in this crisis, performance is not harmless. Every time he humiliates the other side to secure one more headline, he destroys the political conditions the other side would need to justify re-entering the room. That is not strength. That is leverage used against your own objective. If Trump keeps choosing humiliation over discipline, he may still get what he wants most in the short term. The optics of being seen as the man in charge, what he will not get is a durable settlement. And that means the likely future is not peace, it is a quieter war, a harder sanctions regime, a contested strait, and a negotiation process that remains only one humiliation away from collapse all over again.